In the last few decades, gaming has flourished from a niche media to one of the most profitable sectors of the entertainment industry. This growth inevitably led to the wave of new talents jumping in the scene, creating successful titles and in turn, the demand for follow-up. And this is where the game development cycle starts to be complicated. Many developers and publishers would often resort to utilizing different branches of the studios to alternate with development and full releases, but some has to pull all their talents and rely on simply making quality content even if it takes forever. This line of thinking would be the one developed around Gran Turismo as a series. After all, it was and still is a love child created by many on board Polyphony and Kazunori Yamauchi, a series born out of their love for cars and motorsport, hailing some of the most impressive technological showcases even to this day. The development strategy ends up resulting in a very weird but good position for Gran Turismo as a franchise and its existence in the PlayStation ecosystem, with a title releasing early in the console's life and another at the tail end, giving hardware owners many reasons to stick around. Plus, with the constant advancements in car technologies, the need to release small spin-offs and demos becomes a smart move to keep the interest and excitement until the mainline release, hence the existence of these titles. But just how good are they and did they fulfill their purpose? Well, let's start with the earliest spin-off to be made. Sometime after the release of Gran Turismo 3, thanks to the high sales numbers, the plans to produce a follow-up became a reality, leading to the development of Gran Turismo Concept, a standalone expansion which only has 10 playable tracks, a straightforward career progression, and a bunch of brand new car selection. The title itself heavily lends its core mechanics, soundtrack, and returning car models to Gran Turismo 3, hence why I classified it as a standalone expansion. The first simply dubbed as GT Concept Tokyo, then Tokyo Seoul, and finally Tokyo Geneva, each being based on the respective motor shows. Peculiar, however, there is no GT Concept based and released to the North American region, despite the existence of multiple auto shows in different corners of the USA. But anyways, the version I'm playing is the PAL-oriented Tokyo Geneva release, which features every bit of content from previous releases. There is no GT mode. Instead, the main progression comes from this screen of different races and course licenses to replace the usual license test. Instead of putting drivers into 10 specialized challenges, it's just a simple time trial around each track with a bronze and gold medal awarding unlockable cars. For some reason, however, players are given the option to enable or disable the pace car, which brings its own amount of advantages. You don't get an instant fail for hitting them unlike in the main releases, and they can be used to provide a speed boost from drafts, so this opens a new can of worms, allowing players to abuse the pace car for better time results. For clearing every single course license test, a final challenge would be issued, taking players out for a spin on the new Toyota Toaster, a bizarre short circuit on a heavily modified Special Route 5 section with its own set of goals and criterias. Bruh, I didn't know you could fail a fucking race. The remaining progression comes down to the single race mode, replacing time trials with regular races, allowing players to earn multiple prize cars based on the difficulty setting. Before every race, the game provides options for assists, although I would be very careful with the assist settings available. Unlike the main releases, there are no slider options and instead it's either off or on at maximum settings, which ends up capping your performance at every corner. And this is where the AI goes ballistic. The difficulty comes from these guys and their rubber band. Sadly, that is pretty much it for what the gameplay has to offer, which leaves us with the cars. As the name implies, the majority of the roster are either new cars released sometime after the release of GT3 or unveiled concept cars from the international motor shows. In fact, this game seems to have way more hypercars than the full release of Gran Turismo 3. The only way to acquire them is by the prize car system, as there is no dealership, tuning, or selling cars. And for some reason, this game can be used to give yourself an edge in Gran Turismo 3, letting you skip through all of the license tests and will even pitch in 10 million credits for your GT3 save file, making this game pretty unique just on its placement alone. It's a generally great title if you want to try out new vehicles for GT3's handling, and most of the cars used in this game would be brought into the series officially through GT4. Sometime after GT Concept, another title was released with the purpose of keeping the hype and excitement of GT4's imminent release, Gran Turismo 4 Prologue. As the name suggests, is a sort of playable demo. I say sort of because of the weird choices this demo would make in comparison to the full release, like how the gameplay system seemed to still heavily rely on a build from Gran Turismo 3. Physics and handling feels a lot more like its former title, alongside several elements of the UI, which seems to imply GT4 went through a lot of redesigns even after the release of this prologue. The progression itself is a non-stop gauntlet of license test after license test, teaching its players how to drive, utilizing car setups to create the challenge, separated into several different groups. In hindsight, hindsight, it's easy to recognize a lot of these license tests would be used in the full release of GT4 almost one-to-one. Even the different groups of challenges would mimic the licensed categories from the full release. In addition, each test is given narration by the lovely Vicky Butler Henderson, host of the motoring show 5th Gear.
Welcome to Lesson 19.
She'll guide both returning players and newcomers into the upcoming test, giving hints of what you should do to pass with flying colors, like the driving instructor you dream of.
And brake hard and fast to bring the car to a sudden halt.
The demo itself only features 5 tracks, 6 if we want to count the coffee breaks separately. To make use of this low quantity, the challenges often take place on very specific sections of the track, each having at least 1 or 2 challenging time trial sections throughout the entire track. Although the order of the challenges can be a bit bizarre, each challenge will often come in the form of basic driving tests, cone dodging, and sometimes a full lap test. For each completion, a car is unlocked for use in the free arcade mode. After completing the 4 colored sections and collecting each medal, a behind-the-scenes footage showing the team at Polyphony and Kazunori working hard for GT4's research and development, showcasing all the cars they've tested and used for recording and modeling for the game. It's interesting to see all the staff and their passion taking them to places known for some of the best moments in motorsports. But it's not the end of the road just yet, with a brand new collection of challenges, mimicking the Super License with some of the longer challenges. But once it's all done, there's pretty much nothing else to do aside from the arcade. As a pre-release demo, this game would have gotten me excited. With hindsight though, it's weird seeing how much this game resembles GT3 more than what would be GT4. The UI, sound effects, music, and even physics lean more towards GT3, which may end up being misleading, although I suppose not many people would care considering how good GT4 turned out to be in its own right. On the other hand, the next spin-off to release would feature almost every bit of GT4, however due to Kazunori's affinity leaning more towards the 4-wheeled machinery, this project would not be led by him and instead by this dude, Takamasa Shichisawa, the man who gave us GT2, 3, and 4's legendary and iconic intro videos. He was the one to ask Kazunori if they could do a bike-based racing game as a project, making this entire game into a possibility. And thanks to his experience in the motorbike racing scene, he was the perfect man to direct the team. However, if you're planning to play this via emulation, I would suggest looking up certain fixes or else this happens. Exactly as what you're seeing, this game is built on a similar build to Gran Turismo 4, sharing numerous aspects, characteristics, and visual designs. You can even try to fool people into thinking this is a DLC for Gran Turismo 4 and they'll likely believe you. The physics engine, UI, and almost every single racetrack from GT4 are reused here. Progression-wise, it's not that different either. There's the licenses and usual fare of championships to beat, but the game has its own flair of originality, most made out of necessity and simple understanding of the racing genre fans. The rewards we get from finishing these events aren't going to be money, because this game does not feature any currency to speak of. Instead, we get racing gears to customize our rider, which kinda makes sense now that we got a character model planted in our screen. In addition, a lot of racing game fans are more knowledgeable towards cars than they are to motorbike. Just ask any random normie about cars like the Supra or Skyline and they will most likely get a close enough description. But bike?
What's that?
With this knowledge, a change was made to vehicle progression. Instead, each bike is unlocked from completing specific challenges, making them into rewards. It's a pretty neat idea the more I think about it, letting a lot of the main Gran Turismo fans get accustomed to these bikes as they slowly worm their way into our hearts. To capitalize more on the realism side, we can also change our sitting posture. These riding form setups are quite in-depth customizable and can heavily affect how the bikes handle. The default setting is a fine all-arounder, but if you want to be extremely creative, then the option is there to toy around with. Despite the smaller vehicles, however, the game seems to only have at most 4 bikes running at all times, which kinda makes the game feel a bit desolate and empty at times. It may have something to do with bikes in this game being modified from the car models based on the prototypes found in GT Concepts data mined resources. But even then, the game itself seems a lot easier already compared to GT4. Like you can't fall off, and when you do, the game just immediately respawns you on the track again. This can also end up exposing how some of the tracks in GT4 aren't that well suited for a completely different type of vehicle, especially for certain city tracks and original tracks, due to simple clipping causing the riders to just fall off instantly. Fortunately, most of the real racetracks function very well even in this setup. Because Because there's no pitting feature available, there are no super long endurance races here. The longest race doesn't even go beyond the 1 hour mark, resulting in an overall shorter game, but I think that's fine for what it is. This could have been a good beginning for a brand new franchise, but due to what seems to be disappointing sales, Sony refuses to do a follow-up, instead focusing more on the other Gran Turismo projects. It's a bit of a shame, as Tourist Trophy could have been so much better had it been given its own thing going beyond the framework of Gran Turismo, as a lot of the limitations the game suffers from mostly comes from things that are not well adapted from GT4, especially since the motorbike racing scene in gaming could have used a bit of a leg up by studios like Polyphony. Most of the ones we got today don't even hold a candle to Tourist Trophy in multiple aspects. The best we can hope for now is that maybe someone at Polyphony may push the idea again as an update for GT7 or to come bundled in GT8, but I wouldn't get my hopes up. After Tourist Trophy, the full attention of the studio would be directed towards two new platforms, the first being the PlayStation Portable and the other being the brand new PlayStation 3. What came with it is the closest thing to an alpha build of a future Gran Turismo main installment, simply titled as Gran Turismo HD. It was touted as a very experimental game alongside this brand new online play aspect, and when I said this game is the equivalent to an alpha build, I wasn't joking. There's only 10 cars and 1 track to race on. The progression is literally just doing time trials with the available cars to unlock the next one. Then after all that, we get drift trials with the same car roster. And that's it. It is questionable and at the same time an impressive tech demo for what GT5 would be capable of, and to introduce Ferrari as a new manufacturer for the game. For the content, it just makes sense. The specific title was something you could get for free back then in the PlayStation Store, but nowadays the only way to access it is to get a second-hand physical copy, most of which would be priced like a collector's edition and will be in Japanese. It's either that or hoping to get it running on an emulator. Concept HD was then followed up by another Prologue title, which was supposed to be part of the HD release line. The news and release of GT5 Prologue was a big deal, and by a big comparison to GT4's Prologue, they kinda learned a couple of things here. The moment you open up the main menu, there's a bunch of options for online features going up to regular online races, and this weird thing called the GT TV, which are all unfortunately no longer accessible. The majority of this demo is almost accurate to the experience of playing GT5 itself. The game is essentially just GT5 with limited content and only premium cars, so they can showcase the brand new models they've been cooking up this whole time. This in turn allows them to fully showcase the brand new dashcam view, with the driver model doing things you'd expect them to do. It's not much in hindsight, but considering how rare this was back then, it easily convinced people how great the new generation of consoles would be for immersion. Meanwhile, the game's driving physics is pretty much accurate to the full release version, so as a demo, I'd say GT5 Prologue has done well enough for its purpose. Even the content itself is pretty much the races you'd be seeing in GT5's full release, which sadly means the game pretty much just devolves into doing some of the earlier cups without much of the interesting flares that we'd seen in GT4's Prologue. Nothing like a lesson in driving with narration from a well-known car person like Vicky Butler Henderson, so the presentation is definitely more sedated, let's say. There's only 6 tracks available, with the High Speed Ring, Fuji Speedway, Suzuka Circuit, Eiger Nordwand, Daytona Speedway, and London City Track. I guess at least it's more than the ones we've seen in GT4's Prologue and HD Concept, but because of the way this game's progression is handled, I'd argue fatigue will set in much quicker. In GT4's Prologue, it was essentially challenges taking place in specific sections of the tracks, and every now and then a full course lap trial. Here it's always going to be full course most of the time. They try to make it interesting by switching to a reverse layout, but again, because the majority of these events this time are full-blown races, it rapidly builds up that fatigue, because you're mainly driving on the same 6 full circuits over and over again, despite the fact there are 3 different tiers to the event races with their own unique challenges. This time, however, there are currencies to collect and use, gained depending on how well you finish the challenges, and so you can buy any car you'd want to test them out. Unfortunately, the races themselves have vehicle restrictions, so it ends up forcing players into specific pipelines anyways. Make a wrong purchase and you'll end up being forced to grind in a Prologue game. It's not exactly a good thing to have in a game that is supposedly a demo. You're not really gonna convince newcomers with that kind of progression. But I believe this title was ultimately made to showcase what's in store, the true power of the PS3 when done right. The graphical upgrades from the PS2 were astonishing, and that gets amplified by the fact that all cars here are the premium cars. So not only does the tracks look better, but the new lighting and reflections introduced in this generation made the whole thing look amazing. Nowadays, higher graphics don't really impress me, but that's partially because of how saturated the market has become and chasing racing graphical fidelity, while also sacrificing many qualities in the gameplay department. But had I played this prologue when it launched back in 2007, this would have easily blown my mind, just from seeing the graphical jump from the previous generation, and would have gotten me extremely hyped for the full release of Gran Turismo 5. But next to Gran Turismo 5 was another project also developed by Polyphony, the so-called Gran Turismo for PSP. The team did not want a different developer to handle this port, so this ended up going through the same development pipeline as GT5, which may or may not explain why that game got way too long of a delay. And considering what happened to the Need for Speed PSP ports, I can kinda understand the sentiment. Who knows what kind of goofy stuff another developer might add without Polyphony's direct guidance. As such, time and resources within Polyphony are directed towards this small side project. Being in the middle of both GT4 and 5's development, however, meant that this portable iteration ended up getting a bit of spice from both, mostly taking the content and features from that title specifically. The title itself was released alongside the second model of the PSP, which kinda explains why they had to delay the release by a couple of years. Now, the game doesn't really start off on a good note to speak of. Let's start with your starter car, something the studio decided should be randomized, including which dealership you can access every in-game 2 days. An interesting idea since they were pushing for online features like sharing and even training cars between players, but if you're playing this solo or on an emulator, this feature instantly turns this game into a very tedious and possibly hostile environment. If you don't have enough money to spend for a specific car, you only have 1 day to grind for the money or risk waiting hundreds of in-game days. Sure, the dealership has a fixed rotation that will loop back, but it's still a mind-numbingly dumb design to have for future-proofing. It's a pretty unfortunate thing since this is the game with over 800 cars available, where brands like Bugatti, Lamborghini, and Ferrari start to appear in numbers as well. While there is no option to upgrade, you can tune the cars to some degrees. Tires don't require extra costs as well, but the most impactful setting is going to be the choice between standard and professional handling that you can find in the car settings alongside assist. And there is no Gran Turismo mode. Instead, you earn money in several ways. The simplest would be by making custom races on all 45 tracks this game has to offer. You heard that right, 45 tracks in a PSP game, most being directly ported from GT4. They can range from the time trial, normal race, and drift trials. In addition, each track also has their own difficulty settings, which you have to unlock one by ranking up through every single track, meaning no matter how much of a good driver you are, you're stuck dealing with piss-easy AI opponents for several tiers on all tracks. They probably did it like this to give a small sense of progression, but honestly, this ain't it. This should have been a simple difficulty slider anyone can play around with from the get-go. The credits awarded themselves will be based on race length and duration. A good design choice so the players wouldn't feel like they're only wasting time running the Nürburgring. To make it extra weird, they do feature a form of progression with driving challenges, which mostly is presented and behaves like GT4 Prologue with license tests or even mission races. As per usual, there are no prize cards from the different trophies, only cash, but it's a big amount. By getting gold, you also get the bronze and silver rewards as well. Because of the simplified controls, the time targets have been made to be extra lenient, making it the fastest and easiest way to become a millionaire in the game. And Kaz sure did not hold back with the amount of challenges here. Oh, mamma mia. Oh no. Oh god. I thought it would be like a few more. On a more positive note, GT PSP is easily one of the most impressive titles for the console for its technical aspects. Despite being slightly worse than GT4 graphically, everything still looks consistently good enough to make it stand out, and it goes to show just how powerful the PSP can be under the right circumstances, having way more content than GT4 while only requiring 1 GB of space on a platform like the PSP. But its content delivery isn't the best. Like, there's so many blocks of challenges that it'll likely take someone days of non-stop gaming to successfully gold all of them. But once it's done, there's nothing left other than redoing regular races over and over again. This feels like they were banking on the online features to carry inches of the game, but never really gave a second thought about future-proofing. Because if you were to play this now, all of the stuff with its rotating dealership becomes a complete slog, requiring a ton of grinding and then spamming race entry and exit to get a car that you'd want. All I'm saying is they could have done better. After GT5 Prologue and PSP, there will be no more spin-offs to feature as Polyphony directs its focus to the mainline releases. There's just no need for them, as something like the concept series could have been just added in as a simple content update decade, and Sony isn't coming out with a brand new portable console anytime soon. At least until now, with the release of my first Gran Turismo, which is supposed to be along the lines of GT5 Prologue, 2 years after the full release. Look, sometimes the way COS works is a complete mystery, but maybe the content within this is worth attracting a new audience. The demo itself features 18 cars from different brands and performance with 3 tracks available. All of these are shared between the license tests, music rally, races, and time trials. The license tests hold the majority amount of content within 15 tests split within 3 different license categories, 3 music rallies with different songs, 3 races based on 3 different cups you'll see in the full game of GT7, each giving an option between 6 cars to use with differing stats and difficulty options. Although the game itself is still quite easy even on the hardest settings, and even then the requirement is only to finish in the top 5. Meanwhile, the time trial itself is the hardest part of the game, mostly due to it behaving like a license test. A fixed car, 3 time goals to beat, and disqualifications if you so much as breathe near a wall. With each challenge completion granting a free car mimicking the reward feature from GT4 Prologue, with no mention of any currency system in this demo or dealership to speak of. For reaching 100% completion, we are awarded with an official citizenship of Gran Turismo. Oh, and this advertising campaign, I guess. If you're thinking this is going to be a teaser for GT8, well, sadly that expectation is not going to be satisfied. At least the game is free and you get to keep all 18 cars from this demo in GT7. It seems COS and Polyphony are going to keep working on GT7 for the foreseeable future, at least until a PlayStation 6 comes in or something else happens. But this demo is just weird. Why are they doing this now when this could have been a good hype builder back before GT7 launched? It may have convinced people GT7 is actually going back to its roots after its disappointing release of GT Sport. It arguably has less content than a Prologue title as well, but not so few as Concept HD. Yet even the Concept HD was made as an extremely early alpha slice, made with the pure intention of showcasing how Gran Turismo would look like in a new console generation, while also boasting the power that the PlayStation 3 could muster. It's likely this was made for the purpose of grabbing people after the release of the PS5 Pro, and for that I guess, it's just alright. Nothing stunning or interesting, mostly things people have already seen in GT7, and free cars in the hellish GT7 economy is still a good thing I suppose. But hey, maybe they will open the possibility of more spin-offs in the future, something along the lines of an actual GT8 Prologue, perhaps even a new tourist trophy, or maybe even the addition of bikes via these smaller demos to test the waters. So what do you think? Would you like to see Gran Turismo adding bikes in the future, and how many of these spin-off titles have you given a try so far? Let me know in the comments below, subscribe and like if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.